right. It's game day, right? Yeah. Oh, I meant this, not the other thing. I'm just kidding. I'm excited too. So I brought a little show and tell today. This is the Game of Life. This is the 1979 version of the Game of Life, as you can clearly tell by the hairstyles. And it's just interesting. I remember playing. I think this is the game. This is the version that I played as a kid. Yeah. So you remember the board. I don't know if you need to hear the nostalgic sound. I'll be quiet for a second. Yeah, you want to hear it? Right. I think there's like a Cheeto from 1979 under there. So you set up the board. I remember as a kid just thinking like these were like berms, and so if you ever want to know, are you raising a mediocre mountain biker? If your kid is the one sending those things, then yes, you are. But you get the little car, and you get the husband and wife in there. You put kids in, and I'm trying to think where's start. Yeah, start's over there, and you kind of take the loop, and you add kids in there, and you get $500 per kid. Also, the cars are kind of weird. There's only 4 kids there. Being from a 5-kid family. 5 of my own kids, it's a little awkward of thinking which kid would we send back. But on the count of 3, you can all say which kid that you think I should, and none of them are here today, so they won't ever hear about that. So it's a fascinating game because it kind of mirrors a lot of life in many ways, and then yet it doesn't in other ways. Like here's the Day of Reckoning. So you get all the way around the board, and there's the Day of Reckoning. Sounds really biblical. But it says, you must stop on the Day of Reckoning space. Receive $24,000 for each child. Hey, I am so ready for this. I'm rich where it matters, okay? That's right. And so the whole goal of this version is to become a millionaire, right? You have to retire with the most money. That's the point. But this isn't the only version of the game. There's another version of this game that's the original version. This is the 1866 version. I have a picture of that. It's called The Checkered Game of Life. There we go. There's the cover. So you can tell just the dating there. Let's go ahead and go to the second slide. So this is what the board looked like. Very different. And so this was a game of virtues and vices. So you have squares that are like perseverance to success, honesty to happiness, bravery to honor, industry to wealth, okay? But then you have the opposite of that. You have gambling to ruin. You have intemperance to poverty. You have idleness to disgrace, and crime to prison. Okay, so a lot of ups and downs. Maybe it's more like chutes and ladders, I don't know. They have like really interesting and exciting spaces. Like get excited about squares like happiness, honor, college, matrimony, fame. I don't know if you can see it on there, but one of those is a fat office, which I guess in the 1860s is what you wanted. And then finally at the end, the top right hand, that's a happy old age. This was kind of the goal of the game. But watch out for squares like poverty, ruin, disgrace, and I don't know if you can see it on there, but there's one slide that says suicide. Milton Bradley, you were much darker in your old days. We do not play with such things. The point of this version was simply to be the first one to make it to, quote, a happy old age. I guess in the mid-1800s, survival was its own reward. The 1979 version, this one right here, the goal is to become a millionaire and to retire with the most money. He who has the most toys wins. And yet there's more editions of the game. The current edition of the game, you have lifestyle tiles and you get random amounts of money. So it's not you can project how much you'll make. It's you get random amounts of money for doing good deeds of virtue. Things like community service, picking up trash, recycling, volunteering at an animal shelter, taking care of homeless people, staying on the dean's list, studying, saying no to drugs. There's all of these things where at the end they have random values that you learn when you flip it over, and so it becomes a way of gaining money through that. In the original game, money is the byproduct of success that's won through a virtuous life. live a virtuous life, you will have success, and then you will have money as a result of that. Good choices, make good choices, avoid immoral living. Later editions, money becomes the sole metric of what defines success. Well, money defines success. The latest edition, money is rewarded on the basis of social virtue. I'm not here saying any one of these is right or wrong. I'm simply saying we have shifted as a culture through time how we think about success, how we think about life, and the game of life has shifted with us. The game of life evolved from the 1860s as a kind of moral instruction to the more modern version of materialism and to the current one of personal affirmation. This is truly art reflecting life. There are few cultural narratives, if any, that still hold our culture together where everyone believes the same thing anymore. Okay, things like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. While we might have, in days before, we had different ways of achieving that, the idea was we all understood what that meant and we all agreed those were good things. No more. Liberty and justice for all. We have dramatically different understandings of what that means in today's world. That is no longer a uniting word that brings our culture together. Certainly not one nation under God or in God we trust are uniting narratives. The uniting narrative of our day is this right here. It's, hey, regardless of your gender, your age, your religion, your politics, we are going to uncritically buy into this notion that if you try really hard, if you set yourself up well at the early stages of this game, and then your whole life you do really, really well, then you too can have this dream of retiring early, retiring with the most. You can set back in a life of comfort. Whatever age you are, and whatever you are in this process, I think this is a good time to take a critical look at what are we hoping for in the years to come? What are we hoping for? What is God's plan and his design? I can say more money, more kingdom money gets absorbed into the pursuit of simply more money. And it doesn't, money that God has given us, resources that God has given us, doesn't make it to its intended goal because we simply uncritically buy into the model here. And I think this is a good time for us to challenge that. I mean, how many of the world's peoples are not going to hear simply because we're too busy to go talk to our neighbor because we're trying to just make more wealth to try to make it right here to the winner's circle. So I want to ask the question this morning, and hopefully we'll answer this, of what is retirement and what does a gospel-centric retirement look like for us? That's the question we'll be considering through this series. This series on retirement, this is the logical bookend to a series I did almost 2 years ago called The Gospel at Work. Now, a lot of you were not here 2 years ago. All of those sermons are on YouTube. You can go to our church's YouTube page and watch them. I would actually recommend that because that's actually become part of kind of the language of many things we talk about around here. But if you think of the gospel at work as building a theology of work, and now retirement is the other side of that, of what do we do with work when we no longer have our job, these are kind of logical bookends. So for the sake of those who weren't there, I want to kind of summarize just a few of the key kind of foundational principles of that series, because I think that's going to form the sort of intellectual basis for this series as well. So this is kind of how I developed a theology of work. Point number one was everything is God's. There was a phrase by Abraham Kuyper that I modified a little bit, which says, there isn't a square inch of creation where God doesn't look down and say, it's mine. This comes out of the Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and those who dwell therein. And so with this idea, there's a rejection of kind of how modern people see the world. Modern people, we see the world as kind of two parts. There's a sacred and there's a secular. This doesn't actually come from the Bible, though. This comes out of Plato. Plato had this idea that there's the intellectual world of the thoughts, the non-material world, and then there's the physical world. Whenever you draw a dividing line between two things, one becomes greater and the other lesser. Take a neighborhood, put a highway through it. One side of that neighborhood is going to go up in value and the other side is going to go down in value. It's just how the world works. It's no different for philosophy or even theology. If we value one thing, we tend to devalue its opposite. And so For Plato, physical matter was bad, reason was good. The body was bad, the mind was good. This made its way into early Christian theology, and it had a negative effect, I believe. But when we look back at creation, we see that God didn't make Christian and non-Christian sections of the world. And yet, this is how many people see the world, right? So what is Christian music? Well, Christian music is sung by Christians, for Christians, in Christian places like churches. That's what makes it Christian. And then there's non-Christian music. Well, that's all the rest of music. But this isn't how everyone used to think about music. It used to just be music. And the people who were writing all the rest of music happened to actually be very deep and profound Christians. And so we've wound up in a world where that is no longer the case, where now we have Christian and non-Christian music, and they are worlds apart, and sometimes a cheap copy. A Christian job is something like being a pastor, being a missionary. A non-Christian job is being a teacher, an engineer, a mechanic. But when we go back to the Bible, we don't actually see this distinction being made. This is the sacred secular divide, which I'm saying is we need to scrap. Go through hundreds, if not thousands of years of biblical history. It will take you that long till you find the first main character who becomes what we would call something like a pastor or a prophet or an apostle or a missionary type character. Up until that point, God was using almost exclusively people that we would attribute to having regular, ordinary kind of jobs, not religious jobs. And so the first thing is everything is God's. There's not this sacred secular divide. Number two, work is more than your job, right? You might work for a particular company. That is your job, okay? But your work, your God-given work, is above that. Lester de Coster, he defined work as the form in which we make ourselves useful to others. Work is the form in which we make ourselves useful to others. So yes, you have a job, but inside of that job, you play a particular role. You have a certain kind of skill set. You have certain gifts, abilities, and so that's really what you're bringing to the team. That's what you're bringing to the table. I adapted this definition through the language of God's blessing to Abraham. In Genesis 12, God is speaking to Abraham, and he says, I'm going to bless you so that you will be a blessing to the nations. Everyone who blesses you will be blessed, and you, all the nations of the earth, will be blessed. Everyone who curses you will be cursed. In English, that's how that reads, but in Hebrew, it's a little bit more of a command. I will bless you, be a blessing. And so that's kind of, I take that thinking of, well, God has made his people, the people of Abraham, us, he's blessed us in order to be a blessing. And through that blessing, all the peoples of the world will be blessed. So I would say, well, work is the way in which we bring God's blessing to others. So this means if you have a job, great. And if you don't, great. Either way, you have a work. You have a way in which you are useful or a way in which you bring God's blessing to other people, whether you have a job or not. Number three is nothing is small or worthless. In the Lord's Prayer, Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread. How many jobs go into bringing us our daily bread? Starts with a farmer, starts with some equipment, starts with real estate agents, starts with goes into like people who are harvesting grain and grinding the grain and making the bread and shipping the bread and putting it in a place where we can buy it, where we live, a grocery store, the person at the front desk, the person who stocks the shelves, unloads the truck. All of these jobs, when we say, give us this day our daily bread, we're asking God, Lord, commission this really long chain of events so that when I'm hungry, there's bread on my table. But this doesn't sit by itself. This is the follow-up to the statement, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, think of the theology. Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Right? Those two things, that very high theology and that very practical, I need to eat tonight, they're intertwined beautifully in this prayer. Nothing is small or worthless. This means that it's not just the spiritual work of the church, like the church planting, the evangelism, Bible teaching, nor is it just the big work, the big jobs, the important ones like curing cancer that have value, but the work of cleaning, of prepping, of accounting, of engineering, of every other field that represents God's truth, his goodness, and his beauty, these all have value in God's kingdom. Which leads us to number 4, and that is God has a purpose for your work. That purpose is that all legitimate work is kingdom work. even if it isn't evangelism, discipleship, and missions. Sometimes we think the only kingdom work has to be explicitly Christian, and I don't think that's the case. Because God has a purpose to all of the work, and he has placed people in particular geographies to do that kind of thing. When we could look at someone like Queen Esther. Queen Esther, in modern language, she would be considered some kind of political person, a sort of head of state or a wife of a head of state. And yet, even though that is secular work by that language, God placed her very specifically to preserve his people, to save them from utter destruction, to preserve the line of the Messiah. There would be no Jesus were there no Esther. Or he would have done it another way, but you get the point. And so God has a purpose and God has a place for this to happen. I used all of these points to make the assertion that all work is good and contributes to God's kingdom, not just church work or mission work. As such, each of you has been placed by God to be in your place of work, whether it's being a caretaker of children and aging parents or working a regular 9-to-5 kind of job. Could be something big and heady, could be something simple like being a fast food worker, a paper delivery boy. It could also be mission work or pastoring or something like that. But your work is meant to have kingdom impact regardless. And so this is kind of the core foundation for that series on work. And now as we're talking about retirement, when we think retirement, we think ceasing work. We're gonna have to grapple with, well, what does that mean? A few weeks ago, I sent out a retirement survey, and I want to share some of the results. I'll tease these out in various other sermons. A couple notes about the survey. Number one, we had 76 respondents. At a church our size, when you send out a survey, you don't normally have 76 respondents. You're lucky if you get 15, 20, 25. So this one certainly struck a chord. We also had all ages and categories represented in this. Even people who are not retired or people who are young took the survey and answered the questions. At the same time, we should only take the data as reflecting the opinions of those who took it. This isn't representative of everyone, and that's okay. The questions and the responses also, some of these were aspirational. What do you hope to do? What do you plan to do, right? So do you plan on staying or moving was a question. Plans change. And so we're not gonna look you up and hold you to it if you stick around. We're like, no, you said you're going. We were really banking on this. Please leave. We're not gonna do that. All right, slide number 1. What best describes your status? Of the people who took the survey, roughly half are currently retired. About 8% are going to retire in the next 5 years. 17% are going to retire in the next 10 to 15. And 10% have no plan to retire. Now, the actual question that I asked them was worded like this. It's just too long to put on a clean chart. Due to the crushing weight of existential angst and impending financial doom, I have no plan to retire. All right. The sardonic nature of that wording appealed to a particular demographic inside of our church. And so we had quite a few people pick that. But since it was so dark and cynical, I also put, I'm simply too young to retire. And 10% chose that one as well. So you take the 10 and the 10, we have 20% who either feel a deep sense of impending financial doom or who just go, too young for me to think about. This actually is about on trend of the national average. Currently, the national average is 1 in 4 Americans of 50 and above have no way or plan to retire. So we're a little ahead of that curve, but kind of on the trend there. Slide number 2. Do you feel prepared for retirement? About half feel moderately prepared. 32% very prepared, 11% unprepared. 6% are going to work indefinitely. And again, that was worded as, I plan on working until Jesus comes back. But you take those last 2 percentages, and again, you get moderately close to the national average there of how prepared people feel. Slide number 3 is where are you retiring? Are you staying or moving? Just about 70% said staying, 26% said moving. 3% are missing on this, 3.9% are missing on that. I don't know, I should have put alien abduction or something else on there. Now, moving doesn't mean moving away. It could just mean, well, I'm not gonna live in this house. I'm going to downsize and move across the street or move to a retirement community. We weren't overly specific with the questions. Just trying to get a bit of a snapshot. The next slide is, what are your biggest worries? And the main worries fit into a couple of categories. So this is kind of a word cloud. So the more something was mentioned, more time something was mentioned, the larger it is. So obviously the biggest one there, financial. That seems pretty obvious. Purpose and engagement was something interesting as well. That was a high thing. What's fascinating is to see either generationally how this breaks down. I'll break this out at a future time. Generationally how it breaks down, or in terms of people who are not yet retired versus retired, how the worries shift over time. It's interesting. Health, of course, a huge concern. Where to live, social connection, all huge concerns. Now, interesting on this is most respondents listed multiple of these categories. So it's not like people picked one. Sometimes they would put these in items in an order. So we had 76 respondents and we had 116 things listed and mentioned in the worry category. Only 4 people responded with no worries of any kind for retirement. So if you're looking for a good plan B, we know 4 people in our church. Now they probably have some worries, but if you need a good plan B, we've got some people who have no worries at all. They are happy to help, I'm sure. So I'll unpack some of these in a future series, but it's interesting to see how they kind of have changed over time or generation of who listed what. Now, this whole concept of retirement, I mean, when we think biblically, retirement in the Bible, it's sort of hard. There's not a lot of verses, and here I'm going to preach a series on retirement, and I'm going to take the one passage off of the list by simply referencing it today. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. This is Numbers. We got to go all the way back to the Numbers to find retirement in the Bible. Numbers 8:23. It says, and the Lord spoke to Moses saying, this applies to the Levites. Any Levites in the room? From 25 years of old and upward, they shall come to do duty in the service of the tent of meeting. And from that age of 50 years, they shall withdraw from the duty of the service and serve no more. They minister to their brothers in the tent of meeting by keeping guard, but they shall do no service. Thus shall you do to the Levites in assigning their duties. All right. That was a quick series, right, to talk about everything the Bible had to say on retirement. In a more serious note, I think as we look through what are the fears and worries, how does work and non-work, or do we continue work without our job? What does all that look like? I think there's actually a lot that we can build and tease out through the series. I want to give you just a brief history of retirement, though. It's a relatively new concept in the way that we think about it, and that's helpful, I think, to understand this as we go through the stories and texts in the next couple of weeks. Depending on who you ask, you get wide-ranging stories of when, where, why, and how we are now see retirement as a normal and everyday thing. Usually, in most cultures, retirement started as a function of state service of some kind. So you can go to France and Britain and see 1700s where you served in their military and you would have a pension where they would take care of you. The United States followed this with both the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, where people who fought in the military would receive a kind of pension. We could actually go back really, really far into Roman culture. When I taught through the book of 1 Corinthians, Corinth was this colony where the retired military leaders were allowed to come and set up shop, a really nice place. And so that was actually part of their sort of retirement package for their military service. But in modern consciousness, the United States adopted this as an idea right after the passage of the Social Security Act 1935. I should have brought a picture of the advertisement. I missed that. But one of the advertisements I saw from the original announcement of this, which it said, a monthly check to you for the rest of your life, beginning when you're 65. A monthly check for the rest of your life, beginning when you're 65. That sounds pretty cool. Life expectancy in 1935 was 61 years old. There's a government promise for you. Hey, good luck. But for the rest of your life, if you make it long enough, we will give you a check every single month. You're welcome. We are here to help. But it actually took off. It worked. In spite of that, it worked. Between 1950 and 1980, the workforce of those who were still working in their 60s went from 60% of people in their 60s still in the workforce down to 30%. In a similar time frame, almost 40% of employees at ordinary everyday companies developed some kind of retirement plan for their employees. And so retirement as a concept, as an expectation, became normalized. Now, when we think about all those ages, we think, well, they were promising you a check for the rest of your life when you were going to die on average at 61. That age has dramatically shifted in our current generations. Right? I read an article the other day that said the first generation that's going to live on average to 100 years old has already been born. I mean, we're already averaging a much higher number already. And so to think, look at our children's department, those are going to be the kids that live to be 100. What does that mean for the idea of a 40-year career? Well, this article was saying probably going to be a 60-year career. And that's how people will need to kind of reframe. But retirement as a concept and as an expectation became normalized through all of this. I mean, prior to this, the idea of a life of ease at the end of your life as a reward for a well-lived life was really kind of the right of the privileged few. Rather, now it's something that's available to people who simply play their cards right, save enough money, work hard enough, and they can retire. But it's not all sunshine and roses. More and more Americans are now seeing retirement as an unobtainable concept. And even for those who are able to retire, they very often feel a dissonance and a challenge with this new life phase, something that for generations around the world and throughout time have seen as a privilege for the few. Those who achieve it now feel this dissonance with it. Here's how one author describes the phases of retirement. This is from a book called After Work by Joe Malik and Alex Lippert. They say there's 3 phases of retirement. Number 1 is the sugar rush phase. It's the fun of sleeping in, golfing in the middle of the day, or day drinking, not commuting to work. It's the fun of walking around in your pajamas. But this quickly leads to phase 2, which is disillusionment. When life is a vacation, how do you vacation? How do you find meaning? This is the phase where real questions like, will the money last? Will my health hold up? Is this all that there is? This is when these questions become louder and louder. There's a loss of social network, a loss of identity in a world where our work and our job have become all-consuming passions, where we've rejected religion as an identity and as a way of expressing ourselves, and work has filled all of these places of meaning, and now we're not working. What does this mean? Depression among retirees is 28%. This is significantly higher than among adults in the general population. The divorce rates of those in retirement is twice what it used to be. Sexually transmitted diseases have increased in the same age bracket. Depending on what kind of place you're looking at, some places see as much as a 200% increase in a 7-year window. One study found that retired people, especially those in the first year of retirement, are about 40% more likely to experience a heart attack or stroke than those who keep working. 40% more likely to have a heart attack or stroke than if you had just kept on working. And 1 in 6 retirees consider returning to the workforce. Now, their advice is you then go through this period of adjustment. Here's some of their tips. Number 1, embrace the change. 2, adjust your attitude. Accept what you can't change. Redefine your identity. Set goals. Develop hobbies. Join a peer support group. Get a pet. Eat healthy. Get a good night's rest. None of those things are bad, okay? I know it sounds like I'm about to put them down. None of those are bad. Those are all great things. But can you imagine just thinking through the game of life here, and you go, well, I went to a really expensive school, took me years to pay that off, worked and studied really, really hard to get a good job. I worked till I got tenure and all the other, letters behind my name that I needed. And now I get to experience it all. I feel totally lost. And the biggest thing I have to look forward to is a healthy dinner, an early night at bed with a pet that I love. Is this the purpose? Is this what God has intended? Is this the abundant life that he wants us to have, to spend our whole life careful so we can join a support group and go to bed early? Nothing wrong with having friends or going to bed early. But is that all that there is? Maybe it's time that we rethink retirement. The first step of rethinking retirement is kind of rethinking work. And again, more of that was done in that earlier series on the gospel at work. But just to come back to that, your work is more than your job, right? You might have an 8-to-5 job, but inside of that job or outside of that job, you have a work, you have a higher purpose that God has called you to do, right? You might be an accountant, but the higher purpose of being an accountant is exposing and bringing to light and showing truth. And when that doesn't happen, we see where lives are ruined, where people are stolen from and defrauded, and all kinds of other things happen. You might be an engineer and your job is to build some kind of widget, but the job of engineering is to build something in a way where we don't die when we use it. That's very important when we do things like get in a car or hop on an airplane. And so even if you have a 9 to 5, you still have a higher purpose, or there's something about that job that it's being used by God to bless the world. And so retiring from your job does not mean retiring from your work. Right? If you're the kind of person who likes to bring things to light, who likes to expose darkness, that doesn't have to end because you quit your 9 to 5 job. And so if you can figure out, well, what is the real work? Not what's my job, what's the real work that God has called me to? Then when I go, well, I retire from my job, now how do I keep that real work going? Retirement certainly doesn't mean retiring from your faith. I know so many people who they kind of reach the thing of going, well, I spent years serving, teaching Sunday school. I spent years doing VBS. I spent years showing up to church. I spent years doing that. And then they kind of slip into retirement mode. And I'm done now. I put in my time, right? I saved up all my Jesus points, and now I can kind of just live them out and slough it off, right? That's not what God has designed for this. And so when we think of what is our work, we have to ask the question, well, is there an end of work? I mean, for us as Christians, isn't there an end of work? Derek Webster, he wrote an article called Workism. Workism is an interesting term because he's trying to say for people, especially non-religious people, they are finding all of their meaning and their purpose in their job. And their job essentially takes on a greater purpose, much like a religious membership might take on, right? Where that provides you community and provides you meaning and provides you support. Now, the workplace is designed to do all of these things for you. So in this article on workism as a kind of religious concept, he says, if our work is our main source of identity and purpose, the question, what happens after work, whether it's at the end of a career or simply outside of our working hours, becomes a profound challenge to our understanding of a fulfilling life. If work is everything, if we've spent our whole life playing this game, and then we wind up outside of work, whether that's for a weekend, for an extended, medical leave from work, or whether it's retirement, if this is our sole basis of meaning and understanding, we are going to struggle when that is no longer the case. The French philosopher and mathematician Blaise Pascal says, all humanity's problems stem from man's basic inability to sit quietly in a room alone. For a lot of us, that sounds terrifying, to sit quietly in a room alone. This is precisely why we need to reframe our understanding of what is retirement, what is work, what does God want? We often think of work as a byproduct of the fall, but it isn't. Like all things, the fall happens in Genesis 3 and it corrupts everything, including work, but there was work before the fall. God was doing work in creating the world. There was his creative work. I'm a bit of a literalist, so I'm okay with 6 days of creation. That doesn't bother me. So there's at least 6 days of work before the creation of Adam and Eve and the day of rest, and then the fall happens sometimes after. But if you're into, hey, it's time period and it's eons, okay, great. There's even more work happening then. It's simply making the point stronger. There's more work happening that was happening before the fall. But there was work for Adam and Eve. God places them into the garden to work the garden. He places them there to co-rule and to co-reign with him. There was work being done. Then Genesis 3 happens. Then there's a corruption to work. Then there's a drudgery to work. Then there's sin in work. Our human need to get rid of work, though, it isn't God-given. He's given us this task of ruling and reigning. And sometimes when we think of entering rest, we often think of ceasing work, right? So we think, well, God made a perfect world, then we fell, then we had to work. Work is terrible. If I work hard enough right now, I can then have a period of my life where I don't work. And isn't that what heaven is all about anyway? Right? And so there's this kind of logical progression to how we see that. But I don't actually think that the ending of work is what's going to happen by the end. I want to read a passage from Isaiah 65. Isaiah is talking about the new heavens and the new earth, right? So we're speaking of the end of time in some capacity. Verse 17, he sets the phrase with this. He says, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come to mind." Right? So there's the context. We're talking future, we're talking new heaven, new earth. Listen to verse 21 and following and just see if you spot something that sounds odd. When we think of like, what will heaven be like? Listen for something that sounds odd. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. For like the days of a tree shall be the days of my people, and my chosen shall long enjoy the work of their hands. They shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord, and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are yet speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb shall graze together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the dust shall be the serpent's food. And they shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. What did you notice? What was weird? They're building houses. They're planting vineyards. There's children being born, which is certainly weird. And that begins to, we start to ask the question, well, wait, how literally is this expressing? This is poetic language about the future, so we need to be careful, right? Because we know other places in the Gospels, Jesus is asked the question, hey, in the case of a woman who her husband dies and she remarries and remarries and remarries, in heaven, whose wife is she? And Jesus says, in heaven, they're neither married nor given in marriage. So in a very literal context, Jesus says it's not going to work like that. However, we have some very poetic language talking about, life. So we've got to find a balance of, well, what's the poetic language expressing? And I think as we think about that, how are we to take this language? One of the things we see is like, well, we want to kind of draw the principles out here, and some of it is what's not going to be there in this place. So we see that they're planting a vineyard, and but more than that, it's the reaping of the fruit. It's the reaping of their reward. They're not going to plant it and another person take it. Same thing, they're going to build a house and they're going to get to live in it. No one else is going to come in and take them out of it. So think through just the past of their history. Right, as they get invaded and people come in and out, they're removed from their homes and they don't get to actually experience it, to enjoy it. And he's saying, look, in the new heaven and new earth, the work that you put in, you are going to enjoy what is coming out of it. You get a chance to do that. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon talks about kind of what is the best life. And one of his things that he says in there is, it's a terrible thing, it's a vanity to work really hard, but to never get to experience the fruit of your labor. It's another thing, it's all another calamity, it's another vanity if you have all the time in the world to experience the fruit of your labor, but you have no fruit to experience it with. Right? My uncle went through this. His whole life, he had a tiny little fishing boat, but he had lots of time to go fishing all the time. I went to his house a few years ago. He's got the dream fishing boat. Guess what he has? No time to go fishing. And so Solomon says, if you have a little bit in life and you have the capacity to enjoy it, this is the best life. And so that's kind of how this is sounding right here of you're going to plant the vineyard and no longer are you going to have to worry about someone coming in and taking. We look at the children. The purpose of children is not going to be calamity. I don't know that he's saying we're going to be married and have kids in heaven. Okay, what I'm hearing is you think through, again, the time and the invasions. This place has been invaded more times than just about anywhere on the planet. Who's the first people to be hurt in those kind of conflicts? Children. Even in Jesus' day, right? Where he is born, Mary and Joseph have to rush out of town and babies are slaughtered right behind them. And so he's saying, look, no longer is the purpose of a child or the vulnerability of a child going to be exploited. There's going to be peace. The wolf and the lamb are going to lie down together. But look at the serpent though, that's my favorite one. What does the serpent eat? Dust. Okay, in Genesis, there's all of these curses that are placed on us, that work happened, and then the curse of the toil and the vanity of work is placed onto work, right? So that now we work really hard, and then it just feels undone, and we just are on this cycle of repeating. But one day, that curse is going to be taken off, except for the snake. There's this little bit of a wink and a nod of the new heavens and new earth are going to be amazing, but the snake is still going to be under the curse of you're going to eat dust. And so we see that in this new heaven and new earth, and again, I want to be careful not to take poetic language too far, but there's some kind of work. There's some kind of input and then experience and enjoyment of that input. This is work without the toil, the drudgery, the vanity. It's work the way God intended it. Retirement in our common imagination means that it's some kind of leisurely ease after an intense period of work. When we look to the end of time, we see something different though. Even if it's just poetically, we see a world of houses and vineyards that's being worked and enjoyed and experienced. So work was part of the original creation, not a byproduct of the fall. It's corrupted so that our work is rarely enjoyed the way it's meant to be. Its toil and its fruits are often taken from us. I remember my first offshore fishing trip. Went with my dad. I was maybe 12 years old. We were 150 miles out in the Gulf. And I remember seeing the guy who was taking us. He was paid to take us fishing. And to a 12-year-old brain, you're like, whoa, that's the coolest job ever. You get paid to go fishing? And I said this to him. He goes, look, once you get paid to do something, it becomes work. And work is work. Right? So very rarely do we ever get to experience work the way God intended it. Right? Everybody's dressed up for something later, I see. Like these guys get paid to play with a ball. But once you're paid to do it, it becomes work. You have obligations and hours and all this other stuff. It's work. So there's work before the fall. It's corrupted by the fall, so we don't experience it the way it's intended. But in the end, we experience it the way God intended. We experience this cooperative, co-reigning celebration with him. So what is retirement then? Why not call the series The Gospel Retired? In our mind, retired equals quitting and resting. And that's what I'm trying to get us away from. It's not our God-created purpose to just sit around and do nothing. We don't want to make our job absolute, but we need to think of our work and our calling as extending not only into our later years, and not only beginning before this time, but also into the world to come. So I think the right word for this is sustainment. Sustainment, how do we keep doing for God what he's called us to do? That's the question. Someone asked me this week who this series was for. Is this, quote, is this just for the older folks, or will the young people find this interesting too? I said, well, I hope everyone finds it interesting. But it's almost like a parenting class if you think of that. If we were to write a parenting book and give it to people whose kids were grown, it's kind of too little, too late. You're closing the barn door after the horse got out. So in a certain sense, a retirement series is more applicable to people who are not yet retired, because we have a way of thinking, well, if God does call me to do something different, I have the time and the ability to pivot my current plans to rethink that. So in some respects, it might actually be more helpful for people not yet retired. But I'm aware that we're talking to both sides of the room here, right? We have a lot of people who are retired, we have people who are yet to retire. And so with this idea of sustainment, we might have to have two ways of thinking about this. And way number one is for people who are already retired, right? So maybe you haven't had this sense of a lifelong sense of what has God called me to do? What is my real work? What is my real purpose? Maybe you have lived your whole life, just according to the board game here, just kind of going through the motions and doing that. And that's okay. It's not too late. There's a really great book that's very practical for you. It's called The Third Calling. This is by Richard and Leona Bergstrom. And so for people who are currently retired and have already, all of your decisions have been set to this point, that might be a great resource for you. The basics of their book, they say, well, your first calling is your education and career. I think of this more like life phases than callings, but your first calling is your education and your career. Your second calling then is your kind of career development phase of your life, and your family development phase of your life, raising a family. And so then your third calling or your third time period would be this kind of retirement season. And so their encouragement through that book is, how do you now develop in this new period something new for yourself? And I think it's great advice. But let me speak to the other side of the room, which is the not yet retired. I think there's an even better way if you start right now in thinking about this, right? For those of you yet to retire, or even for those of you yet to go off to school and start your work life in the first place, if you could figure out what is your work, not your job, but what is your work, it allows you to have one calling, if I'm going to use their word, one calling your whole life through. This one calling simply takes on a new shape when you're married and have kids, if that's what God calls you to. It takes on a new shape should your kids move away and you're now empty nesters. It takes on a new shape if you wind up no longer having a job, being retired in the classic sense of the word. But it's one calling the whole way through. So when you reach retirement, you're simply sustaining the work, the real work that God has been calling you to all along, even after your job ends. And so I think that's maybe why I like that word, the gospel sustained rather than the gospel retired. We're not quitting gospel work. We're not quitting work. We're trying to think of how do we sustain what God's been doing all along. Paul has a passage, I'm going to close with this. It's 2 Timothy 4:6-8. And this is kind of my prayer for each of us during this series is that we get to make the decisions now in our life, that we get to plan now in our life so that this is something that we could read over our lives. 2 Timothy 4:6 says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all of you who have loved his appearing. From the time that God called Paul, now God did call Paul, very classically speaking, to religious work, okay? So that muddies the waters a little bit here. But Paul had a lifelong calling that at the end he could say, look, I was true to this lifelong calling. I was faithful to this. I finished the race. And this should be our goal. So whether you're currently retired, there's still time to do this. If you're yet to be retired, there's lots of time to do this. But we need to get to this place of seeing what does God call us to. So what does this mean for us? These are kind of my goals for us during this series is that people at every life phase, number one, people at every life phase will engage in the work that God has called them to do. That we would have this sense of clarity and discernment on what is that work that he's called us to do. Number two, for people who are yet to retire, that they'll have time and space during this series to think through and to start weighing and measuring what does a God-shaped retirement look like? How can we think differently than the world thinks about what our future retirement looks like? And if we are going to make a change in our hopes and our dreams, what does a God-shaped life right now look like to get us to that God-shaped retirement? And number three, for the people who are currently retired, that they'll be able to discern how to order and reorder, if necessary, their plan to bring their plans into alignment with God's plans. It's never too late to say, you know what, I've lived life a certain way, I've lived it with a certain mentality, a certain goal, a certain object, and God's shown me I need to change, right? This is the definition of repentance, and it's never too late to make those kind of changes. So my prayer is that during this series, we're going to be making plans now to finish strong together. Let me pray for us. Lord, we recognize that you are a sovereign God, sovereign over time, sovereign over all the geography of the world. All of this world belongs to you. You made it, it rebelled, and you have spent the rest of human history winning it back and bringing it under your rule and reign. And you've chartered us in this process to do this with you. So God, wherever we are at, whether we're retired or not, whether we have whatever kind of job we have, Lord, I pray that you would help us identify with this work of bringing creation under your rule and under your authority, whether that's through our day job or in spite of our day job, whether it's through retirement or in spite of retirement. I pray that this would be what you would help us to understand is what is our particular role in that process of bringing all things under your lordship. So God, we pray for wisdom. We pray for discernment as we kind of put our plans before you, as we have a communal conversation on, do we just accept the version of this from the world, or is there a way that you want us to think about this? Lord, we just pray that you'd be speaking to us, speaking to our hearts, leading us and guiding us, giving us wisdom as we think about what you would have us to do, Lord. We ask this in your name. Amen.